All right, you can start.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think you can flip to the next slide. I just kind of mentioned that already. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Anisha Rampali, and I'm the co-events coordinator for Bye Bye Plastic Bags New Jersey. And I became actively involved in environmental activism when I was a junior in high school with my cousins. And I really like talking about different environmental issues, but the issue that I'm most passionate about is plastic pollution. And I'll be presenting to you guys alongside Amy and Shweta, and I'll give them a chance for them to introduce themselves to you right now.
Hi guys, my name is Amy and I am the co-events coordinator for Bye Bye Plastic Bags New Jersey. I'm so excited to welcome everyone who's here today. I joined Bye Bye Plastic Bags a few years ago, and ever since then I've been working on not only reducing my own plastic usage, but also educating others about the issue. No matter how experienced or knowledgeable you are with environmental justice in our state, I hope that everyone learned something new today, and in the future is able to apply what you learned to fighting environmental injustice. I can't wait to share all that we've prepared.
Hi everyone, my name is Shweta and I am also part of the events team of Bye Bye Plastic Bags New Jersey. And I'm really excited to help the environment through this organization and spread awareness about the impact that our actions have on our earth. And I hope you guys learn a lot from this webinar.
Awesome. So we ask that you guys kindly mute yourselves throughout the presentation, and if you have a question, you can always unmute yourselves. And also feel free to type in the chat with any questions you might have or introduce yourselves to each other. And we'll be answering questions at checkpoints throughout the presentation, so please don't hesitate to ask any questions you might have. And we'll also be recording our presentation, as I mentioned previously, and it'll be available on our YouTube at Bye Bye Plastic Bags New Jersey, so feel free to watch it again or share it with anyone you know. All right, so moving on. Our organization. So, Bye Bye Plastic Bags was first started in Bali, Indonesia by two young changemakers by the name of Melanie and Isabel. And they want to advocate for and ban plastics in their area, and it has turned into a global movement of youth saying no to plastic bags. And there are so many different teams around the world, but the New Jersey Bye Bye Plastic Bags team at its core is focused on raising awareness about different environmental issues such as environmental justice and plastic pollution. Recently, we helped New Jersey pass a plastic bag ban, and it is on Governor Murphy's desk for him to sign right now, which is very exciting. We are very passionate about the intersection between plastics, climate change, environmental justice, and many other different environmental issues. And some of our goals include advocating for marginalized communities and the Green Amendment, and educating the youth of today and tomorrow to address existing inequalities. And we are always accepting new members, and we love when we see people that are passionate about environmental activism and making a difference. And if this sounds like you, or you even want to explore the idea of environmental activism, please consider joining our team. The link to the form is available on the slide, and it will be sent in a follow up email after the presentation in the event that this presentation inspires you to join our team and create change. So, next, I will pass it on to Shweta, who will talk about the issue of environmental justice.
Hi everyone, so now that you've heard a little bit about our organization, it's time to move on to the real topic of this webinar, environmental justice. So let's begin with defining what exactly environmental racism is. It's a form of systematic racism by which communities of color and low-income communities face a disproportionate amount of environmental hazards. They are often forced to work and live near harmful areas, and as a result, they experience more air pollution and exposure to chemical pollutants, which leads to serious health complications such as asthma. So to help put this serious issue into context, I have some statistics to share with all of you. One is that more than half of the people who live within 1.86 miles of toxic waste facilities in the United States are people of color. And specifically, 3 out of 5 African Americans live in communities with uncontrolled toxic waste sites. So this helps show that a greater amount of low-income families and people of color tend to live in these harmful locations. As for the health effects, individuals who live close to noxious industrial facilities and waste sites are 66% more likely to be hospitalized for asthma. And these same individuals are 13% more likely to be people of color. Furthermore, 11.2% of African American children and 4% of Mexican American children are poisoned by lead, compared with 2.3% of white children. So this helps show that because they live near these toxic facilities, such communities face more dangerous health complications. So why does environmental racism exist? This all happens due to the fact that it is often easier for polluting facilities to set up in locations where low-income communities live and work. And this occurs because of policies that allow the improper use of the environment, insufficient enforcement of environmental laws that already exist, inadequate regulation of polluting facilities, and lastly, a reduced access to resources to raise awareness. Many people living in such areas don't have proper information about how their health is being affected due to the area in which they live or work. Many also don't have connections to the decision makers to help establish regulations, and they also may not have access to lawyers. And in addition, many documents are often in English, which cannot be understood by all communities, and this prevents them from receiving all the information that they should be getting. So, environmental justice, on the other hand, demands the right to live and work in a safe environment for all communities. As you can see from the United States Environmental Protection Agency definition, environmental justice is the equal treatment and involvement of all communities in regard to environmental policies. And this includes giving all communities, regardless of race, color, country of origin, or income, equal protection from environmental hazards, so that no community is subjected to a greater amount of hazards than the rest. It also involves allowing all people to be involved in the decision-making process. And this means that they should be able to participate and voice their opinions in any decisions that involve their environment and can impact their health. So, as Bye Bye Plastic Bags is an organization dedicated to reducing plastic waste, we want to explain the link between environmental justice and plastic pollution. Communities of color and low-income communities often face a lot of negative consequences of plastic production and usage. With the lack of places to dispose of plastic, a lot of plastic waste ends up near low-income communities. Plastic refineries and plants are often situated near communities that are predominantly made up of people of color. And because of this, these communities are exposed to toxic carcinogenic chemicals, such as benzene and ethylene oxide, that are produced from these refineries. But luckily, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act has been introduced, and this act was introduced by Senator Tom Udall and Representative Alan Lowenthal in February 2020. So this act would help put the responsibility of collecting, recycling, and properly disposing of plastic waste on the plastic producers themselves. And this would require these companies and corporations to take responsibility for their actions instead of putting the burden solely on state and local governments. And this would place a temporary moratorium or ban on the construction of new plastic producing plants. And this would give the EPA time to investigate the environmental impact of these facilities and establish more regulations. By having the plastic producers themselves take up the burden for plastic waste, this will help alleviate the impact of plastic pollution on low-income communities. So now I'll hand it over to Amy to talk about environmental justice, specifically in New Jersey.
All right, so let's talk about environmental justice here in our own state. So Newark, next slide, please. Thank you. Newark is one of the most heavily affected areas by environmental injustice. It is home to many communities of color, and a quarter of its residents live below the poverty line. And as a result, it is considered to be a sacrifice zone. So what are sacrifice zones? Sacrifice zones are often fence-line communities of low-income families and people of color, or hotspots of chemical pollution where residents live immediately adjacent to heavily polluted industries or military bases. Because many of those who live in sacrifice zones often don't have a voice in the government, they're considered to be expendable, making them ideal places for factories and other major sources of pollution. For the past 7 years, Newark has been in a water crisis because many of the homes still contain lead pipes which date as far back as the 1880s, over a century ago, that have not been replaced or improved. These pipes are now eroding, releasing lead into the water system, an issue which can have harmful effects on people's health. In fact, these effects are most severe for children, and they include lower IQ, hyperactivity, slowed growth, hearing problems, and anemia. For adults, there's cardiovascular effects, increased blood pressure and incidence of hypertension, decreased kidney function, and reproductive problems. Because of this, the water crisis has become a major concern for Newark residents, who are worried about their health, the health of their families, and especially the health of their children. In addition to the water crisis in Newark, there is also major air pollution occurring in the area due to places such as the Covanta trash incinerator, the Newark airport, manufacturing factories, and the sewage treatment plant, all of which release toxic chemicals into the very air that residents breathe. Due to this air pollution, there are high rates of asthma in children. In fact, 1 out of 4 children may have asthma, which is 3 times higher than the national average. There are also higher rates of cancer due to the chemicals that have been released not only into the air, but also into the water and the soil. Next slide. However, the New Jersey government is working to combat environmental injustice. On September 18, 2020, Governor Phil Murphy signed an environmental justice bill, Bill S232, that allows the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection to deny permits to any projects that could have a negative impact on the environment near already overburdened communities. This bill applies to any mass pollution producing facility, such as power plants, recycling facilities, sewage treatment plants, incinerators, landfills, and more. The way that this bill works is that before any projects receive a permit, they must write a report detailing the environmental impact of their project on any overburdened communities and whether or not it will add to more pollution. An overburdened community is defined according to the census as having one or more of the following demographics: 35% or more of low-income households, 40% of minority residents or residents of a state-recognized tribal community, or 40% or more households with limited English proficiency. After the report is submitted, the Department of Environmental Protection will then determine if the project is acceptable and provide a permit if it is. Due to the strictness of this bill, it will be one of the strongest environmental protection laws in the US once it becomes effective in March 2021, marking a historic movement toward environmental justice in New Jersey.
Sorry, I was muted. Do any of you guys have any questions so far with what we talked about? All right, so I know Ayana asked, since the bill just got passed, what work is there left to do regarding environmental justice in New Jersey? So, Amy, if you want to answer, what you think, that would be great.
Thank you so much for the question. So that's a great question, actually. Even though we've passed the environmental justice bill in New Jersey, there is still plenty to do because these communities, in the sacrifice zones, there already have been factories that are being built and that have been built already, and these factories are continuing to release pollution and harming these communities. So because of this, it's important to take measures to help reduce the pollution that's already being done, in addition to stopping future plants from being built. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was a great answer. If I can just add to that, I think it's more of making sure that the bill stays where it is, and making sure that, different governments follow through with what they're saying that they're going to do, and having them protect these communities, as well as, like there's always pollution somewhere, it's not, right now we don't have a perfect world, obviously. So it's important to kind of keep that balance and keep fighting and get to that state of equality that we might see in other communities in New Jersey. And then Shweta, if you want to add anything, feel free to add.
No, I think you guys both perfectly described the question.
Okay, yeah, Ayana, I hope we answered your question. If there's anything else, just let us know. Okay, great. Does anyone else have any questions that they wanted to get asked? Okay, so if not, if you guys have any questions that pop up, feel free to just put them in the chat. We'll get to them when we can. But if anyone doesn't have any questions now, I think we can move on to our next topic. All right, so we have a very special guest speaker with us today, Anthony Diaz. He's from the Newark Water Coalition, and it's an honor to have him here. So his mission, or the Newark Water Coalition's mission, is to educate and mobilize residents into demanding clean water for Newark. And also with that, I think comes, clean air and making sure that they have all the necessities that they need to make the communities equal to other communities in New Jersey. And that's their website if you guys want to check it out. They have some really cool updates in there. And then if you want to go to the next slide. Okay. So just a little bit about Anthony Diaz. He's a Newark native and he's the oldest of 4 brothers. And he's currently the New Jersey organizer for Faith in New Jersey. And he's also a co-founder of the Newark Water Coalition. And he's been actively involved in activism since high school. And he really believes that people power and recognition of how all different struggles are interconnected and how they're different from one another are the keys to winning the war on the people. So yeah, now I'm just going to pass it off to Anthony Diaz so he can speak with you guys today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It is an absolute pleasure to be here today. Thank you to Bye Bye Plastic New Jersey. I hadn't really heard about you folks until you reached out, and then, doing my research, obviously I don't speak everywhere. I'm really excited about the work that you're doing, and I think it is important, especially when we see all the environmental issues going on today. So thank you for the introduction and the bio. So the Newark Water Coalition was founded in 2018 with co-founder Saber B and myself at her house. It was really birthed through we kept hearing things in the news and people were like, somebody should do something about it. And I was like, yeah, somebody should. And that somebody is definitely not me. And then, more people kept talking about it. And then finally it hit a point where okay, this is an issue. It seems like a lot of people care. I'm gonna have a community meeting and see who shows up. So the first community meeting we had, I'm expecting 5 to 10 people to show up, 30 people show up. And I'm like, oh, all right, well, if 30 people show up, that means people care about this issue. I sent another call out for another community meeting and another 30 people show up. So at that point, it was like, all right, we have to do something. But what do we do? What can we do as, volunteers, as a grassroots organization with no funding, no type of structure, just people with a heart that really care. And it was education. We realized that there were so many different narratives being talked about this water issue, and the lead crisis in Newark has been, such a prevailing issue for a very long time. And so oftentimes people were like, what's the timeline? When did this all start? How did this happen? So the timeline we like to use at the Newark Water Coalition is about 2016. Yes, there have been lead issues throughout, Newark's history, and, the infrastructure is old and things like that. But 2016 is kind of like, I guess, the current modern timeline for this. In 2016, 30 Newark public schools were found tested to exceed the to exceed the lead requirement. So the federal lead standard in America is 15 parts per billion. So 15 parts of lead for every billion parts of water. The CDC says there is no safe level of lead. So, there's always conflicting data, and you see these numbers play out through, Flint, Michigan, and other places where there are water crises. These numbers tend to pop up. So one of the things that we like to say is, okay, we look at that point where the Newark public school systems had lead in their systems, and the government said, hey, don't worry, it's only in the Newark public school systems, it's not throughout the city. Well, what happens? Since 2016, the city of Newark has exceeded its lead just until this last round of testing. The highest number we've tested for, and I believe it was in the summer of 2019, was 54 parts per billion. And to kind of put that in perspective, Flint's lead levels were about 20 parts per billion. Flint also had like Legionella and some very, very toxic poisonous chemicals in their water. So that is a difference. But our lead levels were higher than Flint. And people don't like to talk about it, and they kind of brush that data under the rug. If you check up our Instagram page, we do have a graphic that shows the lead numbers by year. And so another question we get is, how did this happen and why did this happen? So again, when you're dealing with the beautiful government of the city of Newark, there's a lot of nepotism involved. There's a lot of incompetence. There's a lot of people in positions that should not be there. And so while it's not all on the Baraka administration and, dropping the ball on this lead issue, it goes back to, Sharp James, Cory Booker as well. Everybody had a role in kind of the lead crisis that we're facing today. My criticism of the Baraka administration is several of the programs that they instituted seem to have several gaps. And one of the things that I say quite often is, well, if the city was doing everything that it was supposed to be doing, the Newark Water Coalition wouldn't exist. We wouldn't have the resources that we have. We wouldn't have the, the network we have, and we certainly wouldn't have the platform we have. So we always challenge that narrative. Even if the city is saying that we're doing everything we can, that's not what we're hearing in the communities. And especially with the pandemic, that adds a whole nother layer to this real life. It's a double crisis. It's a crisis within a crisis. And it's really, really heartbreaking sometimes to see people, suffer in silence and go through this. And all they're asking for is clean water. That's literally what all we're asking for, and that's what all the people are asking for as well. So it moves on to what the Newark Water Coalition does now, or these days. So we still do presentations such as this. We do town halls. Since the entire world has moved on Zoom, it has made things a little bit easier, but I love to do in-person presentations. I think it's so important to physically be there, but safety is always a concern. We always do give out resources. If it's filters, if we have filters, we're giving filters out. If we have physical bottles of water, we're giving that out. Currently, we just partnered with 501c3, which is Jaden Smith's company, Will Smith's son. They sent us a $30,000 or I think a $40,000 piece of equipment that allows us to filter water through any connection with a hose. So what is serendipitous about this webinar presentation is that we're saying bye to plastic bottle distributions. We're no longer doing plastic bottle distributions. We're using reusable jugs. And I had a call on Friday with a company that can provide us with the flat kind of camel bags in recyclable cardboard boxes. So we're trying to be sustainable as an organization as well. And I think that's why it's so dope to be here and doing this presentation tonight. So why is that filtration system so important? And that's the crux of everything that we're going to do moving forward, is because we can literally provide an unlimited amount of water to the people of Newark, clean water. It goes through, I think there's 3 or 4 filtration methods. We've gotten so many compliments on the taste of the water. We test the water before we give it out. So we make sure that it's pure of all, no lead, no kind of bacteria and things like that. And these are things that we're going to eventually train citizens to do. So what is the city of Newark doing on the flip side? So the city of Newark is patting itself on the back for changing the lead service lines. They have instituted several programs, but one of the things that we exist is to say, hey, this lead crisis is far from over. One of the things they said, once we replace all 18,000 service lines, everything is all good. However, you can still have lead soldering, lead fixturing in your home, lead paint in your home, and all of these contribute to lead poisoning. It's actually 20% of lead poisoning is caused by the water, 80% is caused by paint. Which, we try to educate people on all of this to make sure that they're in the position to best educate themselves. So the city's saying they still give out filters. We have heard in the communities that that's not true, that's not being done. The education they're giving out is more congratulatory on their behalf, where it's like, hey, look at everything that we're doing, but it's almost like for show. And it's like, hey, there is a disconnection between the reality of what's going on and what you're saying you're doing. And that's where we really, really push back on the city in a lot of ways. They should have been doing water distributions during COVID. It's a time where people need these resources. The first thing they tell you to do is wash your hands. And so if you're having this conjecture in your mind, or this kind of ambivalence on whether or not your water is clean, whether or not your water is safe, it's going to make you less likely to do that. You already have all these hesitations, and you already, one of the things is the city itself is so distrustful. So who do you turn to? And one of the things that we always say is trust the facts, do the research. If you don't trust what I'm saying, everything that I've mentioned is Googleable, if that's a word. You can go to the DEP's website on New Jersey. There's a link on there to Water Watch. If you go to that, that will list any public utility in New Jersey. You can find any violations, the chemical composition of your water, and who your water sells who your municipality sells its water to. So the reason why this Newark crisis is so important, because of that last part, Newark sells its water to 22 different municipalities. So Belleville and Bloomfield have also had exceedances in their lead levels because of the Newark crisis. And so it's not just a Newark issue, it's affecting cities all over New Jersey. And that's one of the things that I try to mention in these presentations. And like you mentioned before, I believe all struggles are interconnected, because environmental injustices don't stop at borders. There are no borders when it comes to our environment. We all live in this together. I was just doing a presentation over this weekend in Kentucky. I physically went down there, and they're having water issues. And so what was great for me to see, and this is why I believe in that interconnectivity and that coalition building, is because these are poor rural white people having the same issues as poor Black and brown urban people. And in the time where we are the most divisive, it's these systemic problems that we need to start tackling. Let me get off my soapbox. So future projects. So there are 3 projects that we are going to launch, which, I'm inviting everyone on this Zoom call to join in on us. The first project, we are looking for mutual aid groups across the state of New Jersey. I don't care where you're located. If you are participating in mutual aid, I want to connect with you to set up reoccurring deliveries of water to your residents. I think that is a brilliant plan. We can sell, we're not selling this water, we're offering it to, for folks for free. So if you're part of a mutual aid group, please get in contact with us. I listed the email further up. It's newarkwatercoalition@gmail.com. And this also, if they're part of any other organizations that are looking for any kind of water donation, we can make that happen. The second project we have going on is we want to also give these reusable jugs that we are using to fill up the water for distribution. We want to give it to the houseless community. So we want them to be able to bathe. We want them to be able to sanitize. We want them to be able to cook, or, whatever they want this resource for. We want this to give this to a community that we know is vulnerable. We know people don't care about, and we want to build relationships. We are about real relational organizing at the Newark Water Coalition. And then I think our third and final project is on the site lead testing that we do for the water box. It's a $300 kit. We are going to buy 5 of these kits to set up teams to train folks to test people's homes in real time whether or not they have lead poisoning in their water. So they don't have to wait on the city to do it. They don't have to pay for this result. This is something that the Newark Water Coalition is offering free to community residents, and we also want to train folks to get involved. So those are the 3 big future projects and how to support us. And one of the things I always say, you know, all our links, always, we need money, always donate. If you want to give $5, that'll still buy us a jug, but time, I will always take your time over your money any day. You don't have to be the one knocking on doors or, you know, out there with the bullhorn or filling up jugs, but if you can only make copies or make phone calls, we need people to do that as well. Everybody needs to get involved in a struggle, right? If you're on this Zoom call, it's because you care about the environment and you want to do something to change the current status quo. If you can only make copies, do that. The struggle needs you. The struggle needs people to just do the logistical stuff. And I think that's kind of underrepresented a lot in these calls and these presentations. I believe as an organizer, and you folks on these call are either activists or organizers, you must live out or you must organize in every aspect of your life, right? You must be living that out because again, we are seeing in 2020 what this country thinks of its most vulnerable population, what it thinks of this planet, and what it thinks of just minorities in general. And so, you know, I think there's different aspects to fighting environmental injustice and just injustice in general. And what I implore you is to plug in. And the last thing I would say is always share this information. It does nothing for you to be on this Zoom call, to hear about the struggles of Newark, to hear about the legislations getting passed on the environment, and then do nothing about it, and not to share it on, you know, Facebook or Instagram. That's like the bare minimum that you can do. There's about 14 people on this call. You all have networks that I don't have. You all can reach people that I cannot reach. And so that is what real coalition building is doing. You know, it's allowing us to have access to different groups of people that might show up to a meeting, that might donate, or might plug in, or might have an idea for a different project. And so that's, again, I'll end by saying all struggles are interconnected. And if we can recognize that and break down these walls of silos, then we can win this war on people. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. That was a very inspiring presentation. Does anyone have any questions for Anthony?
I like the typed out applause. That's good.
All right, so if you guys have any questions, as always, feel free to put them in the chat. We did prepare a couple of questions for Anthony, so you guys can get some useful info. Okay, so Shweta, do you want to? All right, it's actually, you don't need to share your screen, I don't think. If you want to, you can, but all right, so I'll just read some of the questions that we had. So Anthony, is there a significant event that made you realize that environmental racism exists, or have you always known growing up that it exists?
Well, you know, in doing this work, what's interesting is how other cities move as a result of how Newark is moving. So what I've seen is like Maplewood and Montclair starting to do their lead service lines. You see these suburban towns really trying to get out ahead of this issue so they don't end in the same boat as Newark and trying to, like, you know, what Newark is trying to do is cover up that Flint 2.0 kind of label. And so these other towns and cities don't want to be, you know, contribute to that narrative. I would say, you know, it's honestly doing the research. doing the research, I was like, wow, this has been going on for so long. Why isn't anyone talking about this? Why isn't anyone doing anything about this? Oh, that's right, because we're a black and brown community that constantly gets the short end of the stick. Like, you know, one of the things that you talked about was the Covanta plant, right? That literally puts out pink and black and purple smoke into a community. And it's like, why? This plant's not in Livingston. This plant is not in Fort Lee. This plant is not in, you know, any of these suburban towns. And there's a reason for that. And so when you start looking at it, not only from a local level, but also like a state level, you start realizing these things. When you start looking at different other states and realizing, hey, there's water quality issues in all these places. Okay, this is a social economic problem for poor people. Poor people, again, they always get screwed over in these situations. So doing the research really allowed me to look at the picture of everything and then realize, damn, this sucks. And there's no, you know, you've heard the phrase, there's no planet B. So if we're not fighting for the environmental front, then what, it doesn't matter, right? Medicare for all doesn't matter if we're all dead. Medicare, you know, moratoriums on housing don't matter if, you know, literally the country is on fire. So you realize that environmental activism is literally the foundation for all other activism, right? And one of the things I really came to understand during COVID and during the lockdowns is like, you know, I could only ride my bike, right? I couldn't go anywhere. I'm riding my bike, I'm experiencing nature, and I'm like, wow, we need to protect this. What are we doing if we're throwing away literally the environment we live in? It just, and so I would say that's kind of what changed me, because in the beginning I was very police brutality, housing justice. I was fighting on, and I still do, on those issues, but I've come to realize, like, you know, I don't just arbitrarily say water is life. Like, that really means something to me, right? Doing this work has really, really ingrained to me the seriousness of that phrase, because without water, what do you have? You can't wash yourself, you can't wash your hands, you couldn't cook, you couldn't, you know, drink anything, you couldn't survive off of Mountain Dew Code Red alone. So when they say water is life, it literally means so much.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Arush said your story was so inspiring. It's so terrible to hear about how duplicitous the government really is. And he asked, how do people react when you tell them just how idle the government has been in the face of this crisis?
Well, it's tough because, you know, you have people that are supportive of the government because, hey, they're paying them, right? City officials, people on the payroll, community members on the payroll. So it's like, nah, Anthony Diaz and the Newark Water Coalition is lying. And it's really to set us up in those us versus them narrative, right? And let me tell you, it's very difficult for me not to take it there either. But I try to keep the focus on the community. And what I tell the community is, listen, yes, I want to give you these resources, but I also want to empower you to be able to advocate for yourself on anything. So it's not just about this one issue. It's like, let's look at the history of the government. If you look at it and you play by play, you start to connect the dots for folks. And that's where you win them onto our side, because they're like, well, is it just the water issue? And you're like, no, there's several issues. And it just doesn't go back, you know, till, you know, these 4 years, it goes back many years. And when you start laying out the history for folks, people really realize, oh, wow, it's a systemic problem and the system is against us. And so, you know, that doesn't win everyone over. There are times where I've showed people literally scientific data on the water issue and people are like, no, the mayor says it's all good, so it's all good. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to do with that. So, but you just have to remain consistent. You know, 2 years ago, everyone was talking about the lead crisis in Newark. Everyone. It was this hot button activism issue in Jersey at that time. And people fell off. People stopped organizing around it, except for the Newark Water Coalition. And so one of my biggest criticisms on nonprofit organizations is that they go into a community, they kind of like dish out resources, and then they leave and they pull out when those resources or that funding is gone. but we haven't. We've remained consistent. We're getting more resources, so people start to trust us more. But again, that's 2 years of hard work of doing these things, of having meetings of, 5 people showing up, and just, trying to rally everyone together. But that has won us a lot of support. So it's very hard. It's not just one answer to that. But I think in doing the work and being consistent and authentic, really has shown a lot of people that we mean what we say, and wow, we really are doing the work out here.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to go back to what Ayana asked earlier, just because, I feel like you definitely have more experience with environmental justice and different specific knowledge specifically. So, what work do you think is there left to do regarding environmental justice in New Jersey and maybe even Newark as a whole?
Oh, there's tons of work on environmental justice. One of the things that again, I want people to think about is how there is a difference between a law and enforcing that law, right? Because the law in the books is if there's an exceedance on lead in New Jersey, the public must be notified. But so our first exceedance was in 2016. It wasn't until 2018 that the public was notified that there was an issue on lead in the city of Newark. So there's definitely a difference between enforcement and legislation. What I think is, if you're involved in this struggle as an activist and as an organizer, or if you're a part of an organization, you need to be a watchdog. You need to make sure that, hey, we fought for this law, we got the law enacted, but that's not it, right? Are they doing the environmental impact studies? Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? And if they're not, who's going to hold them accountable? Because if, it's one thing for the government to say, hey, or Governor Murphy to say, hey, we're doing the right thing, but it's another thing to really live that out and to enforce these laws on companies that have skated by for many, many years. In Newark, it's a myriad of environmental justice issues. It's not just the water problem. There's just so much there. The Covanta plant and the Ironbound and the trucking pollution, the gentrification itself, because you're literally like building up these flood zones in the city of Newark. Just the very, physical trash and the recycling that's not being done or being done inconsistently. So there's tons and tons and tons of EJ issues. And what I would suggest is find the thing that you're most passionate about. Find the thing that really drives your soul. Everybody knows that quote, be the change you want to see in the world. But for me, it's transform your life and yourself so that the world can see your change and change along with it. And you do that by finding the thing that you're passionate about and going hard for it. We're living in the age of COVID. People are wearing masks, country on fire, Trump. So all of these things are going on, and it's easy to lose hope, and it's easy to be like, oh, well, let me toss my hands up because where do I even start this issue? But I say, go look at the flip side of it. The world has changed, and we know it can change. So let us be the deciders of the new normal. Let us find out what we can change in our communities or on the state level or on a national level. The opportunities are there. You just have to look for them. And, it's easy for me to kind of give it to you, but I think in doing the research yourself, you find out what you really want to do. One of the things that, ultimately I want the Newark Water Coalition to be is a place that trains and activates and mobilizes organizers, right? I constantly talk about organizing the organizers. And so, come here, come join us, I'll figure out a place for you. I'll put everybody to work. It doesn't matter to me. There's so much there there's so much work to be done that I think it's just a matter of finding your own passions to plug in at.
Yeah, for sure. So I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but how can young people get involved with specific Newark Water Coalition projects? Do you want to talk a little bit about the recent projects that you're doing?
So the 3 projects that we have announced, actually I haven't even announced them yet. So we're trying to restructure the entire organization because of the Jaden Smith project. A lot more people are contacting us. A lot more people are tapping us to see, hey, what's going on? So we need bodies, right? If I can give out water 5 days a week or 7 days a week, I'm willing to do that, but we need the manpower to do that. And just so, even if you don't live in Newark, doesn't mean you can't help. And we can also use these programs and like, the mutual aid stuff. A lot of different communities are doing that, and we want to partner with you. So even if you're thinking about starting a mutual aid group based on water, we can help you out there. If you have a project and you're like, hey, I don't know necessarily about the work that you're doing, but I have an idea. I'm always receptive to doing the work because I know that there's so much work to be done. So the first thing I would suggest is sending an email, introduce yourself. If you have a resume, send the resume, tell me what you're passionate about, tell me how you want to plug in, and we'll find a spot for you. One of the things I'm having tomorrow night is a coordinators meeting because we're looking to restructure. I'm also looking for different coordinators. Now, the coordinators, I want them to live in the Newark or the greater Newark area. But again, if you have a passion for this work, I can use you. And so it really is a matter of what you want to do and how we can partner together.
Awesome. And then I just had a couple more questions. If anyone has any questions,
Feel free to ask. You can ask me anything you want.
You can unmute yourselves too and ask as well. Okay, so what do you think, Anthony, is the best way for young people to raise awareness about environmental justice? What forms of media or like specific projects that you think are most effective?
So for me, I'm an old organizer now. So I'm a fan of like traditional door knocking and canvassing, and under COVID, it's very, very hard. You folks, I would say anyone under the age of about, we'll say 27, 30, you folks live in a radically different world than I grew up in. And because of that, everybody's talking about the social dilemma and how social media and all these technologies really affect us, but they're tools. They're tools. And you as young folks know how to utilize those tools to get your messages across in the best ways. And I say that because people are watching y'all constantly. They're seeing what you're posting. Most, I read a report recently that most people get their news from Facebook or Twitter from their friends. And so because you have a powerful platform yourself, utilize it to push the EJ issues you want to talk about, right? Because here, a lot of things happen in organically in this fashion. I've been talking about this for the last 2 years. Some people care, some people don't care. But when something comes up and it affects someone directly, they reach out to me. Hey, I know you've been talking about this water issue for, forever. I noticed X, Y, and Z. Can you help me out here? Be that person. I love sharing resources. I love connecting folks. But I think, the younger generation has an opportunity to utilize all these social media platforms, all this technology at their fingertips. There are no more gatekeepers. You want to start a podcast on something, do that. Look at how people are getting their information and then tap into those networks. And I guarantee you that's the best way to do it. And be consistent. Consistency is key. Doesn't matter if you're first, because eventually you'll get the experience over time to refine your skill or craft, but you have to be consistent. If you're going to say you're going to put something out every Friday, put something out every Friday. If you're going to say, I'm going to volunteer my time and commit myself, make sure that you honor that time and commitment. Because honestly, this work, we don't need half-hearted people anymore. We don't need people who are dipping their pinky toe into kind of social justice work, and that's fine, right? You really have to be honest with yourself and figure out, okay, is this something I'm really passionate about, or is this something that, I'm like kind of meh about? Because that's also going to determine how people perceive you on this work, what kind of content you're putting out there. So I would say, look at your network, look at the things that you're already doing, and also think about things that you've always wanted to do, right? YouTube channels, podcasting, TikToks, EJ TikToks. There are so many different aspects to the world that we live in now. Don't limit yourself. And also don't, again, I'm an old man. What do I know about about what the world that you folks are living in now? So I also think that there's plenty of opportunities there in unconventional ways. So the reason why I say unconventional is because everyone's protesting, everyone's marching, you're hearing the same narrative over and over again. They kind of co-opt all that energy back into electoral politics, but you're at a time where you can reinvent yourselves under the age of COVID, and people are listening and tapped into social media platforms all over. But they want to see something different. They want to experience something different. That's what a lot of our programming at the NWC, we definitely try to do it in a way that's really just like an experience that you won't get anywhere else, because that's what people ultimately want. They want an experience on anything, but that they can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, definitely. So we know you talked about how you got interested in environmental activism with the water crisis in New York, and just realizing, how much lead and chemicals go into the water and how many people don't have access to clean water. Was there a different event that got you started with environmental activism, and why did that event get you started with activism, if there is one?
I don't think there was an event that really kind of changed it. It was literally just doing the research. Doing the research really proved to me like, oh man, this is a conspiracy theory, and like people need to know about this. I would say that. I think, yeah, that's what I'll say.
Mhm. Okay, awesome. And we know you're a co-founder of the Newark Water Coalition. How did you get it off the ground? What type of early work did you do? I know you talked about the group meetings you had with, the 30 people showing up. How did you reach out to other people and get the word spread?
So I think when I talk about the NWC founding, what's interesting is, so prior to that, December of 2018 is when we had our first meeting. Prior to that, I ran for office for city council. But I had been an activist in the city of Newark for a while, doing Black Lives Matter, Newark, doing Homes for All Newark, just doing different works. But running for office built my platform up to talk about different issues. If you're young, running for office is terrible. Like it's a horrible experience unless you make it fun and make it your own. However, it builds you a platform and a network that allows you to talk about the issues that you want to talk about. So oftentimes I say, people only listen to me about the water issue is because I ran for city council. And oftentimes, your traditional incumbents, they campaign, but once the campaign's over, you never hear from them again. However, Anthony Diaz has always been doing the work because he's always been doing the work. So I would say, early on, people listened because I had just ran for office. So they were looking at the next project, and they were looking at the projects they were looking at the work that we were doing. So very, very early on, it was nothing but town halls. It was nothing but town halls and presentations. This is my research. This is the research that you can verify. This is what's being said. This is the update on like the lawsuit that's going on. And it was really, really just providing people information. The second part of it was water distributions. Water distributions are the heart and soul of this organization. If you cannot participate in a food distribution, water distribution, any kind of distribution that, gives a resource to a person, and they're like, oh, do I need to pay for this? Or do you need my ID? And I'm like, no, I'm doing this because I care about you as a human being. And they're like, what? And that changes you, and it changes them. And so, we started getting, and all of our funding initially was like GoFundMe, and we started getting water bottle donations and just started giving those out. And then we opened up a second location. And right before COVID, we were going to open up a third location. Just constantly being consistent, because people don't want you to just show up and leave. That's the worst thing that you can do. So, when I talk to new organizers, I'm like, be consistent. Just be consistent. That's all. People who are traditionally marginalized and hurt, they want consistency because they never have received it before.
Yeah, definitely. Why is it important to address environmental, racial, and other interconnected issues together rather than separately?
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, sure. So why is it important to address environmental, racial, and other interconnected inequalities together instead of, treating them as separate issues?
So I am super left wing. I am, socialist to the max. And so, oftentimes when you look at these issues of housing, if you're looking at the race relations, if you're looking at policing, it all comes back to capitalism. I am anti-capitalist. I'm a socialist. I believe that workers should decide what goes on in the priorities of our community. So when you look at it from that 30,000 feet lens, you're seeing how all of these problems stem from one source. So we can fight on these issues, but if we're not attacking the source, then we're not really doing anything. We're putting band-aids on a knife wound. The other thing is there's so many overlapping, like a great example is how lead poisoning alters your health, right? If you're a child, it changes your behavior, it makes you more prone to aggression, and more prone to violence. So when you look at the history of Newark and you're like, oh, wow, this is a high crime city, I wonder if the lead poisoning had a factor in it. And, we don't have any direct correlations, but it's hard not to say yes to that, right? It's hard not to say, okay, if, I think another stat is 1 in 4 children have some kind of behavioral problem. And again, if that's happening in the city of Newark, we don't know if it's directly tied to the lead poisoning, but we know the lead poisoning doesn't help. But then these behavior problems are also prone to join gangs or prone to be violent. And it's like, oh, well, that's the reason why they're justifying a high police budget because of the crime and because of this. But we're not looking at the environmental, we're just looking at the crime aspect. Housing, right? Homelessness tends to create crime, but you're just penalizing people from not being able to have a house and their environment. And if they're getting sick, and like, again, it's how all of these issues are almost like a Venn diagram, but we in the social justice community treat them as silos. And if we're not talking to each other, if we're not sharing resources, if we're not sharing networks, if we're not sharing platforms, then we will lose. It's the interconnectivity of all struggles, There are works, we got a year ago, we got a donation of 15,000 tampons from Always. And people were like, well, why? Like, why? And I'm like, because I'm never gonna say no. This is gonna allow us to plug into, women's shelters. 99% of the women that receive these tampons are Black and brown women, right? For free. This is a free resource. And that allows us to talk to women or any group about the water issue, but in an organic way. Hey, we got this, we're here to help, but let me also talk to you about the water issue. Or what issues do you care about? What issues that are important to you? And it's something that, we easily could have said, no, we're the Newark Water Coalition. What do we need tampons for? But no, I'm open to every opportunity because I see the correlation between all struggles. And I am doing my damnness to break down these walls and silos because we can't afford to do that anymore. We just can't afford to organize in our own little bubbles and think that everything is going to be all right.
Yeah, I loved how you talked about like the interconnected, struggles. It really brought it to light. I know Ayana was wondering if she said, I think you touched upon this, but what are some specific ways to get involved with Newark Water Coalition from outside of Newark or with limited time?
So we're like, it really depends on you. So like, I know we're going to start writing bylaws soon, so we can use help on that. I have graphic designers that are outside of Newark. They can always use help translating. We always could use some translators, Portuguese, Arabic, Creole of language. We're always trying to push out different information. I want to recreate all of our documents, our one-pagers. Web designers, oh my God, if you guys know a web design, I hate our website. So if you know web designers, send her our way. We always need content creators. We have a YouTube page. We have podcasting equipment, we have video equipment, but I want to utilize this stuff. We have an office space now. If you just want to show up and clean, you could do that. And again, I think really for me, is the best thing you could do is push out all of our information. If there's something specifically, in mind separate from that, bring your ideas. We are open to doing this in a way that's fundamentally different. One of the things that, I'm as I formerly worked at a nonprofit is understanding that when you work for these organizations or volunteer for these organizations, they're so formulaic in the sense of like, you have to organize in the way they want you to organize. I think that's bull. I think there's no one way to do this work. So whatever talents you can bring, you can say, hey, Anthony, I'm good at these 5 things. I want to try these 5 other things. Where can I fit in? I will find a spot for you. I would say too is understanding with that philosophy of there's no right way to do this, that opens up the opportunity for you to develop yourself as a leader. I really want to set up the Newark Water Coalition as a counter institution of these traditional nonprofits that tell you this is the way to do it, when you can find the way to do it within yourself in a way that's really meaningful to your life.
Yeah, definitely. And Ayana, I sent all the Newark Water Coalition information in the chat once again. I think the main thing is just starting off with emailing the Newark Water Coalition and kind of just like Anthony mentioned before, introducing who you are and what you want to do. And I'm sure Anthony can work with you on what you want to get involved in. So great that I'm happy that you want to get started with them. And I think the last question that we had prepared, I just wanted to ask, just any last tips you have for young change makers, people who learn about these issues and are just don't really know what to do about it and, kind of need a guided path, or just any tips you have in general for just people.
I would say the first thing, first and foremost, is your voice matters. Your voice matters much more than you could ever imagine. Our testimony is probably the biggest thing that, and when I say ours, I mean your testimony is the biggest thing that can really affect change. People, your friend circles, your friend groups look at you as an individual, the things that you're passionate about, the things that you care about, and it either, it inspires them in a way. So I would say that's the first thing. The second thing is don't let any adult, myself included, tell you there's a right way to do anything, because there isn't. You're never going to have all the information. You're never going to have all the data. You're never going to be able to make the most informed decision. So what you can do is make the decision that feels right in your soul and spirit. And, I understand, and this is from a person that I know I operate at a certain level of privilege because I'm able to do the organizing work and still have, a home, shelter, and food, every night. But do not amputate your soul for a check, for a degree, for someone else's vision of your life. There are so many different ways to define success. Don't let other people do it for you. Define how you want to be successful. Define how you want your life to look. I think that to me is fundamentally important because, yeah, you could join, Greenpeace or, Newark Water Coalition or Bye Bye Plastic. But if you're not doing the work to really transform your soul and your spirit, then what are you doing? You're kind of just plugging into the next project, staying busy, but you're not really transforming. And I, I've said it before, but I'll say it again. When you doing the work of the Newark Water Coalition has completely transformed my life. I was the IT director of a charter school, and that job was terrible. It was god awful. And I quit that job after leading the Video Music Award protest. If you're unaware about it, we did a VMA protest 2 years ago We had 300, folks show up, people got arrested, lights shined on building. It was amazing. It was amazing, an event. And I went to work the next day and I realized like I was living this kind of Batman, Bruce Wayne kind of life, right? Superhero at night, but a regular old white man, well, brown man during the day. And I realized like I didn't want to do this anymore. I was tired of doing it. And so I walked away from that, just stepping out on faith, thinking that, all right, I want to do the work that I really want to do. And I want it to lead me anywhere. And I can tell you, I've spoken at Princeton University. They paid me to speak at Princeton University. I've been on so many panels. I've flown out to Michigan and Wisconsin to talk to folks. And it's been a wild adventure that only really ultimately tells me to double down on myself, double down on what it is that I really feel like my spirit is passionate about, and it's the water work. But that has opened up so many opportunities that I never thought I would have ever, been blessed with. And it's allowed me to connect with so many different people because ultimately, I really just care about my community, right? I really just care about my community and I want to make change. But now, when I'm talking about organizing organizers and all this other stuff, all of that's grown from really the water issue. Like I never thought I would be here, today. Literally, just drove back in from Kentucky to do press conferences on their water issues. Like I never thought like I would have these kind of opportunities in my life, but it's because I tapped into what I'm most passionate about. Because I blocked out the noise of this is how you should live your life. This is what you need to do with your life. This is, everybody else can tell you how to live your life, but they're unhappy. So you kind of got to push that bull aside and you got to say, okay, I'm young, I'm passionate, I have a spirit, and I'm gonna change the world. I'm gonna change the world. And doing that, the sky's the limit. I'm not gonna say it's gonna be all fun and games, but I can tell you, I had a job once, I was making very, very good money, and my spirit was the emptiest it's ever been. And now I am full. I am full both inside and out. So I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, it was. Thank you, Anthony. That was really inspiring. I know we went a little over on time, so if any of you guys have any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat now. You can ask about Newark Water Coalition. You can ask about Bye Bye Plastic Bags New Jersey. Anything you guys have? Any last questions? So Aru said, thank you for your words. You inspire me so much. All right, so if anyone doesn't have any lasting questions, Bye Bye Plastic Bags New Jersey will give you a follow-up email, so you can feel free to reply to that if you have any questions or you want to join. And Newark Water Coalition, their email is in the chat, I believe. Yes. So you can always email them if you have any questions, but I know we went a little over, but thank you, Anthony. Your presentation was really inspiring. I hope you guys learned something from this presentation, and I hope you guys are inspired to create change in your communities.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, guys. Bye, everyone.